All right, so we were about to add some guidelines so that we can still see our stage when we move things entirely over it. So what I'm going to do is just zoom right in here on the very top left corner, and with my rulers opened, going to place a guide there and a guide there. So I'm just basically covering the very edges of the stage. And if I don't like that placement, I can always move it a little bit. Now there did seem to be an issue on the computers in the classroom that when you move these they were disappearing. So I can show you a workaround in class if you can't get this to work for you, but this is how it's supposed to work right here. And if they are disappearing, then what you want to do is maybe just get the placement right on the first time, which is not the greatest thing to do. But there's also a workaround where you can just place a rectangle on the stage with a stroke on it only, or place it with the stroke and a fill and delete the fill, so that you basically have a stroke going all the way around the stage. And if you do that, you have to put it on a layer. It makes sense to put it on the layer up near the top. Doesn't have to be the very top, and then lock that layer. It will show up when you record your animations. Or what I meant to say is that it will show up when you preview your animations with the command return, but actually there's a way that you can get around that. So let me emphasize my point here, is everything that you have here in layers, even if you temporarily have a layer locked with the eyeball, will show up when you do a command return. Now, there's a couple different things that you can do to make that not show up. One is you can click over here and tell it that it's a mask. So that's one way that you could do that, is it just be a mask sitting out here by itself and then with nothing to mask, and then that way it wouldn't show up. I think you could make it also a guide, would do the same thing. I'm going to return that one to normal. The other thing that you can do is, if you want just the eyeball to toggle it from not showing up, is you can go into File and you can go into Publish Settings, and you can put remove the check mark here from Include Hidden Layers, but by default that is checked. Okay, so now if I command minus a time or two, you can see that my stage is now wrapped around with these guides, and then I can just simply put this in my starting position where I want it. Okay, so all of that was to position my first keyframe for what we'll refer to now as the background. So now if we give ourselves a little bit of room here, and this we don't want to go by too quickly, so let's just make a guess over here, do an F6, copy that keyframe, and now we'll move this over. A couple different ways we can do this to make sure that our movement is constrained only to moving in the left direction. That would be, one way would be to click on it and then click and drag with the shift key held down. That'll constrain the movement. And the other would be to actually use the transform palette to move it over like we did in the earlier videos. So let's move that all the way over like that. Put our classic tween in there, and then if we scrub our playhead, we can see that we are getting what appears, or what will appear to be, a pan. It'll look like the camera is panning to the right when we actually know that the contents are moving to the left. And I'm just going to go ahead and reposition this because I don't want this to immediately start animating as soon as the playhead it gets past the introductory type. So I'll do that familiar. What should be familiar now is just take this first frame, copy it back a bit, remove the tween, and so now we go from the text to the number 1, and then it starts moving. Now would be a good time to go back to frame 1 and populate it with the button that'll take us here, and if we haven't to the masking one, we'll go ahead and we'll do that, at the same time, but I also want to introduce you to the concept of a troubleshooting button. Let's pretend on this video that we don't actually have these flags in here. A lot of times you'll be working on, like in your final project, for example, it gets to be 30 seconds long, and you might be having a little bit of trouble just at the 10-second mark, where there's 10 seconds left. So the 20-second mark, 10 seconds to go in your animation, and every time you hit Command Return to see what it's really doing, you see that problem. Because or hopefully you should know by now, that just pressing the play button in here is a good way to preview your buttons, but it doesn't really tell you for sure whether it's working. So rather than have that painful process of watching 20 seconds of your animation only to get to the 10-second mark and realize what you did back here still isn't working, it'd be nice to be able to jump to a section right away. So you would do exactly like what we've been doing, but let me just give you like a thorough example of what you might do. Let's say that the problem you're experiencing is right here. So you're just going to go ahead, put a F7 in there. You're going to go into properties. You're going to give the label a name, and let's just call this troubleshoot. And we'll just keep that around as long as we need it. We can keep moving it, and if I extend this with an F5, you'll be able to see that it does indeed say troubleshoot. And then what you would do is go back to the first frame and install a button that's going to jump to troubleshoot. But maybe you don't want it to be evident that you have this button there. Maybe you want to share what you've been doing with your client, but you want to keep the button there. So let me show you how you might do that. Okay, so let's make that invisible button. You'll notice I also made my other two buttons and would suggest that you do the same either right now or before we go in to set the code for this invisible button so we can knock out a bunch of code at once. So what you can do right here is make a button, and all you have to do is just grab some entity and note where you want the button. So let's just say bottom left is where the invisible button is going to be. And then we just simply do our F8 on that to create the invisible button. And give it a name like invisible button. We want it to be a button, so that's good. When we get into the edit mode for the button in the library, here's where we're going to make some changes to it. We're going to go into properties, and we're going to actually click on that, and we will change it so it's invisible. And one way we could do that is take this little chunk here, turn it into a symbol, set its alpha down to nothing, but it's just a little tiny shape that's really not going to take up a whole ton of memory. So that's choices up to you. But just remember, changing the color of a symbol, we do in the properties, something will come up down here when it's a symbol to allow us to do that. But when it's a shape, we actually go into the fill color with it. Now notice it's selected already, and then we just go to the alpha, dial that back to 0. And then I'm going to click over here again, and I'm going to F6, F6, F6. And when I come back out to the main timeline, we can see that if we hover over here or click in that general area, there is indeed a symbol there that is a button, but we set its alpha to 0. Now if we preview this and with the command return, we can see that all of our buttons are working. Oh, I forgot to put the italic in these, which I'll do in just a second. But now it looks like there's no button here, and if you were sharing this with the client, you could say, look how great my buttons work, blah, blah, blah. But if you were trying to troubleshoot either or with the client, you wanted to say, yeah, and look at this part and go there instantly, well, it's not going to do that because we haven't previewed it yet. And boy, I tell you, Flash has been crashing a lot, and you just got to develop a sense of humor with this kind of stuff and remember to do backups. So I'm back post crash, and as you can see, I'm still working on the recovered file just to make sure that everything is there. In a minute I'll go back to my other one, but Yep, gotta get a sense of humor about this kind of stuff. Anyway, I fixed up the buttons now so that when you hover over them in preview, they go to italic. And so before we go ahead and we'll code these two buttons and this one together just so you can see maybe a faster way of working, a professional way maybe of working when coding a bunch of buttons. So we just got to make sure that this, and this all get instance names, and instance names that you can easily remember. You might want to put them on a piece of paper. Okay, I wrote down all my names just in case you want to use the same names as mine. I'll just go through them one step here, and you can pause and write them down if you're interested in doing that. And here is the third one. And so now we'll click on this first frame here, do a right click, go into actions. And so if I copy this whole entire thing here, Command C, and paste it 3 more times, and I'm just going to remember about where the number is here where I'm pasting it so I don't accidentally write on the wrong one. So starting at 38, there's a second paste, third paste, go back up to 31. So what I need to do is just make sure that I give all of these unique new names. So I'm going to change that one to 4, that one to 5, that one to 6. Go here, make sure that these two names are the same. Make sure that this name and this name are the same. And make sure that this name and that name are the same. So that was just a 4-4, a 5-5, and a 5-5. Now, everything else except this tag is the same. So all I have to do is, well, no, I'm sorry, not quite everything. This name and this name right here where we're actually talking to the button. So here where we're talking to the button, since all of my names ended with underscore BTN, all I have to do is just drag across here, put the new name in, and continue. And now that all 3 of these have been changed, if I remember the actual name that I named the label, I can go ahead and put it in. Otherwise, we'll go back to the main timeline and just explore, write those down as well. And so pan, zoom, and just make sure that you watch, what's capitalized. It needs to be exactly the same. In fact, if you're, a little bit paranoid about this, which you kind of should be whenever you write code, you can always just click on the frame, go into the properties, and zoom across or drag across there, do a Command C, copy, go back into actions, or you can take a chance like I'm doing here and just write these down, but write them down really carefully. So the other one is troubleshoot, all one word, but with a capital S on the shoot. And then the only other one I need to go back and find is what I named shape tween. And actually I hadn't even created that label yet, so I just did shape tween. In fact, this one, since we're right here, I will just click in here and swipe across there and copy it. Now we'll go back into our code and we'll start writing, and in my case pasting the first one in there. So since I have shape tween on my clipboard, I'll just go ahead and go here between the 2 quotation marks, paste that in there, and then do the same for these, making sure that they correlate to the button name. Now I've done it for mine. If you're using the exact same names as mine, both here and here, and you copy this, it'll work. I haven't tested it yet. We'll do that in 1 second, but I just want to tell you, if it does for me and it doesn't for you, then I would suggest that you just go back in and cut and paste from the properties inspector first all 3 of these, and then the same thing for the label names. Okay, I've tested the buttons, both their interactivity and their actual workings, and they are all working. And we'll look at that invisible button in a minute that is close to panning and zooming, but it's right after the text. And the beauty of this invisible button is it is invisible. The only way anyone would know it's there is if they got their mouse over it. And if you wanted to, you could make it really tiny so that you're the only one who knows that it's there. In fact, on my Flash website that's still up, I have an invisible button. Click on it and